And we are live.
All right. Welcome back to another great week with another great topic. This week, I want to talk to you about training your dog to leave it and what actually it means to have your dog leave something in different contexts. Because a lot of time when I'll come to my client's home and we start to talk about goals and stuff for their dog, and they're like, my dog steals everything. I just want them to leave it alone. And of course, you could train your dog, leave it, but then I'll come back the next week and they're like, oh, they're grabbing more things. So I wanted to go through what leave it is, the different contexts, which you can, different, situations you can use leave it, and how to go about training that. So at least you can get started with your dog. How is Archie when it comes to like stealing stuff and leaving it in items?
He was really good. And like the last 6 months, he started to grab
Hmm.
stuff from the counter randomly here and there. Like he just got brave
Yep.
all of a sudden. And so
Yep.
he knew not to do it. And now like he'll grab treats off the bathroom counter if we leave them there, because when we walk in, sometimes we leave them there,
Yep.
or the kitchen counter. And so it's been interesting. But generally, like we did a lot of leave it in the beginning when he was younger. And
Yep.
so like he'd be able to leave like a treat on his paw for like 45 seconds to a
Oh,
minute
that's
and
pretty
those sort of
good.
thing. Yeah,
Hmm.
we work on that stuff, impulse control and everything. But it took a lot of training, but we got him there. And so it's I find it really helpful for like walks. If there's something that I don't want him
Yeah.
getting or sniffing, if leave it rather than pulling on the leash, tends to work a lot better. And then he's
Hmm.
communicating with it. Yeah. So yeah.
Exactly. And leave it's one of those things where, along the way, along the dog's life, you're gonna have to like reinforce, because as you think about it, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, you can ask your dog to leave one thing, but as they get introduced to more interesting things, it's more enticing and it's harder for them to leave. And so you always want to make sure you continue training that. So the situation, so leave it essentially means just asking your dog to leave something, whether it's an item, whether it's leave you alone or whatever it is, you want them to stop doing something. The different situations you want to teach leave it. Of course, you want to teach leave it. So if they're going to get something on the ground that you don't want them to have, especially something that's dangerous, you can ask them to leave it. And that goes for in the home and especially on walks. Another situation you want to teach leave it. A lot of times when you think of leave it, you think of on the ground. But just like you were saying with Archie, they start to jump up on the counter. And so in my sessions, I teach my client how to do leave it from the ground on the ground. So when things are on the ground, or say you're cooking something, you drop food, dogs are waiting right there to catch it. And then also teaching them how to leave stuff up high. So when they are jumping on the counter, or even if they're jumping on the couch, you could teach leave it as well. It's just really important, like I said, to build up the leave it. And I'm going to explain to you how to teach leave it. And then I'm going to go back to those situations. So leave it, you can start off pretty simple. It doesn't matter how old the dog is. And it's a game great for the kids too. So you start off with a treat in your hand. And all you're going to do, you show them the treat, you close your hand. Your dog's initially going to try to muzzle to get the treat out. You're not going to say anything. You're not going to say any words yet. Soon as your dog stops, you're going to say yes to let them know, because technically they left the treat, right? So you're going to say yes to let them know they did a good job. You're going to open your hand. You're going to let them take the treat, all right? You do that again. You let them muzzle, muzzle, muzzle. You wait for them to stop. Yes, and you give them the treat. So you're treating them for actually leaving it alone. You're not saying anything to them. So what ends up happening once you do that with them, they'll get to the point where they won't even touch your hand because they're like, I know to leave it. So you'll go to do this and they're like, no, you're not going to fool me. And that's your cue that you can move forward and make it a little bit more difficult for them. So I tell folks, once you practice in your hand, practice putting the treat on the ground, and putting the treat on the ground, putting your hand over it, letting them muzzle, and then doing the same thing, waiting for them to stop. And then once they do, you can give them the treat. But the most important thing is when you're practicing on the ground, you want to make sure that the treat that you ask them to leave, you're not saying leave it, okay, go back and get the treat, because you want them to leave something that you put on the ground. So it's very important once they do leave the treat, you pick it up and you give it to them. So you practice with the treats, you practice down low, you practice up high for counter surfing and things like that. And the trick start to practicing up high, a little tip, be sure you don't practice on things you actually don't want them to jump on. So you're not going to train them and practice jumping up on a counter if that's someplace you don't want them to jump. So ideally, I tell folks to practice like on a kitchen chair that you can push in, or even a folding chair, or things you don't mind them getting up high like that on. You can practice on. And so ideally, my clients, they start off, everything's good, and, my dog's leaving it. But then the disconnect happens when, folks, I'm telling you, what you have to do is you have to practice with the real items. So the items you actually want your dog to leave, you have to practice with that. So whether it's a shoe, whether it's a slipper, your key, whatever it may be for you, you want to practice with those items so that your dog knows to leave it. And what do you think is going to happen if you keep on practicing with those items? Your dog will see those items, and most likely they won't even touch them because that's what you've been practicing with. But with that being said, to kind of generalize it and make it so that they can do it all the time, you want to practice a few times throughout the day. You want to practice with different items, have different people practice it. So they're used to different people being, doing the command and stuff like that. But that's how you're really going to get your dog, doing it all the time, and you're not going to have that slip back to where they aren't having it. Another thing you can take in consideration too is your dog's age. And maybe we'll do another live about this, the developmental process of dogs. Of course, puppies are into everything. You teach them to leave it. But like I said, somewhere around the teenage years, they start to rebel. So they may regress and start, like Scott said, the dog may go back to, getting items and stuff like that. So with any training, not just leave it. You want to make sure that you stand on top of it, practicing as often as you can. And when you're out on walks and you practice and leave it, just like Scott said, you can use the leash and kind of like, no, leave it. Even before they get to the item, the sooner you notice the item, whether it's in your home or out in the walks, and you start to say leave it, it'll help redirect them as well. Have you tried any of that others? Have you practiced up high with Archie for the counter surfing? Did you say
No,
you did?
We hadn't,
Yep.
but we should have, because like a lot of sheepadoodles are like notorious counter surfers. Like we've seen,
Yes.
like we're in sheepadoodle Facebook groups and we always see the photos and videos and stuff. So we should have, but he had always kept down for the most part. Cause like you said,
Yep.
we never really left anything on the counter usually, or like within reach. He
Yep.
just has like a corner in the counter where he knows that we keep his treats. Once in a while, he'll like go up and then we'll just tell him off and then he'll get down. But
Exactly.
yeah, it makes sense. Like, practicing that, but obviously not on the actual thing you want, so they don't get used to. You're almost like, in that case, you're almost like building the habit by accident, and they're
Exactly.
like, you
Exactly.
told me to keep getting up here, and then you just tell me to leave it, so it works.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
yeah,
And you
that
want
makes
to make sure, another tip too, make it easier for your dog. So try to pick up your shoes. If you leave stuff on the counter, if you have a dog that can't reach to the back, push it all the way back. So we call that management. The more you can set up the situation so the dog can't do it, the better they'll be. And then one thing I always tell my clients is the more, just in dog training, dog owners in general, the more a dog gets to practice a behavior, the harder it is to change. So be sure that you stand on top of them, pushing things back on the counter, picking up things off the floor, and that should make it a lot easier too when you're asking them to leave it as well. So I hope you gain some good tips as to when you start training, leave it, to kind of get it up and going. And I hope it does make sense as to why sometimes there's a disconnect where you think your dog was trained to leave it and is still doing it. Like I said, just make sure you practice with different items, and that should help with that. Scott, do you have anything to kind of piggyback off of what I said before we hop off?
That's pretty much it. Like definitely
Yeah.
practice it. If you're looking for any other tips, don't hesitate to reach out to Pam.
Mhm.
If you try it and you're like, hey, this isn't working or that isn't working, don't hesitate to drop her a DM, Instagram, Facebook,
I'm
whatever
always
works for you.
around. Yeah.
Website, email, all those good things. But yeah, it's a great command. It has so many different uses. So definitely
Exactly.
work on it and practice. Like Pam said, you got to continue to work on these things even as they get older. So it makes a lot of
Yep.
sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
So next week we'll be back with another great topic, and I'll be interested. Drop it in the comments. I want to know how your dogs are doing with Leave It and what their struggles are, because I know everyone's different. And I'll be interested to know. Other than that, enjoy your week, and we'll see you guys next week with another great topic.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.